So we continue our discussion of Moll Flanders. We begin from page 53 to 56. So we saw that Moll's gentleman tradesman husband went bankrupt and was imprisoned, and then he later fled to France. So Moll found herself once again a widow bewitched, that is, she was in the position of a widow, and her husband would never be able to legally return to England in the next 50 years. So once again she was free to fend for herself, but she could not, of course, legally marry anybody. Her marital status could not be changed, or a divorce could not be. So her status became ambiguous in the East. The first thing she did was to leave the area she knew and call herself Mrs. Flanders. So why she left the area? Because following the suggestion of her husband, she stole the goods or the clothes that were in her husband's shop, because the claim on those goods would be on the creditors. So the creditors would claim that, and the commissioner would confiscate all those goods. But before they could do that, Moll stole those goods, which was a crime. And therefore she changed her name and she changed her place of residence. And she adopted this pseudonym Mrs. Flanders. Now, as you probably know, that Flanders is a place in Holland, and it was famous for some production of some kind of cloth, linen, as well as laced material. So Flanders once again is the name of a commodity derived from the name of the province in Holland. It actually refers to the cloth or the commodity. So Moll begins to call herself Mrs. Flanders. Moll sees much drinking and debauchery in men who ruin themselves and their families. Therefore, men were not very upright either. Most men that Moll met in her society, they spent their money after drinking and after women, and ruined their families. Moll lives with a widow for 6 months, who soon gets married. So the marriage of a widow would suggest, the quick marriage or easy marriage of a widow would suggest that society was very slack in the matter of morality or in the matter of sexuality. We know that in contemporary Indian society, widows were not allowed to marry or remarry, and we had to have a reform movement led by Vidyasagar and others, so that women got the right of remarriage after being a widow. So in England, on the other hand, the situation was completely reversed. That is, there was a lot of slackness in morality. Thus, we see two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, too much morality, so that women were unnecessarily deprived of a chance to marry after becoming a widow in India. On the other hand, in England, we see too much slackness of morality, and widows could frequently marry. Even though this comparison with India is not needed in the context of the novel, I just mentioned it in order to contextualize the situation of 18th century in England as opposed to in India. Moll learned that the state of things was altered as to matrimony, and that I was not to expect at London what I had found in the country. So marriages in the country, in Colchester, were different propositions as compared to marriages in London. That marriages were here the consequences of politic schemes for forming interests and carrying on business. So this aspect of London society, where marriages were always financial transactions rather than social building of social relationship, this aspect of English society has been well depicted by Jane Austen in her novels. Every family would first assess how much money the other party has. What is the financial status of the groom or the bride before any marriage relationship would be finalized. But that is later during the Regency. But here Defoe depicts an earlier period in England. Even then, in the 18th century, marriages in London were politic schemes, which means that a lot of scheming went on regarding forming alliances in marriage. Politic here means clever. So basically, the scheming was about upgrading one's financial status through marriage in London as opposed to in the countryside. So it was about carrying on businesses, and love had no share or very little say in the matter. So in London, love was the least concern where marriages were. That, as my sister-in-law at Colchester had said, beauty, wit, manners, sense, good humor, good behavior, education, virtue, piety, or any other qualification, whether body or mind, had no power to recommend that money only made a woman agreeable. So all these qualities had no power to recommend a woman that money only made a woman agreeable. She quotes again or remembers again the saying of her sister-in-law. So in coming to London, she remembers this saying, and therefore she realizes the centrality of money in English society insofar as marriages were concerned in this period. So we may say that this was a kind of displacement of values, and love was neglected as a value. It had no importance. On the other hand, as the market ran very unhappily on the men's side, I found the women had lost the privilege of saying no. So through Moll, Defoe always refers to marriage as a market. So marriage should be an important social relationship, important social bonding. That was looked upon as a market, which means that the influence of capitalism, the influence of market economy was so overwhelming upon society that even social bonds were looked upon as markets. And as in any market, there is always tough competition. So in the marriage market also there was competition. But the competition was unfortunately between the sexes, between men and women. And in a capitalist market, those who have more capital, they are always more privileged and more powerful. And therefore, in this society, men always had more money, more wealth than women. So men always were more powerful in this business transaction that was marriage. And the other metaphor that Defoe uses is that of a game, like a card game or a gambling. And in a gambling, those who have the better cards, they have more power and they become winners. Similarly, the men used to have better cards because they always had more privilege. So they were the winners in this game. So there is an attempt by Moll to understand the way the market machinery operated and whether she would be able to manipulate the machinery in such a manner that the game could be changed in favor of women rather than men. Moll helps a young lady to regain her lover, who was a captain of a ship And in this example, we see Defoe boldly portraying a woman as winning the game. That is, when the woman takes the initiative, then she wins the game. So Defoe is also upholding the bourgeois virtue of entrepreneurship, industry. So one who would be industrious, one who would take the initiative will win. As the lady asks his neighbors about his character, morals and wealth, he gets offended and leaves her. So this captain of a ship who left Moll's friend, the woman, the lady. Why? Because the lady was making queries about him. What was his designation, how much money he actually earned and so on. So the man became offended and he left her. And this was very arbitrary. So Moll advised her to spread false rumor that he made false claims about his job and wealth, and that he is ill-tempered and abuses women. So here we see the power of gossip, the power of scandal. So as in the 18th century, we find in London the development of society, the development of the coffee houses, the parties, the tea parties, or the assembly of people in the salons of women. So we may say society was coming into existence, or a public space, public life was coming into existence with the rise of the coffee houses, with the rise of the newspapers, journals and so on. In these societies, in these clubs, in these groups, gossip, scandal also was one of the favorite pastimes of people, and we often find in literature a reflection of this. We have Sheridan's School of Scandal, for example. So here we see that Moll spreads rumor or gossip about the captain, that he made false claims about his job and he did not earn so much, he was not wealthy, he would abuse women, and this information spread to all women. So to whichever woman the captain approached, he was rejected. Thus he was forced to return to this original woman, Moll's friend. All women approached by him reject him, hearing the rumors. He comes back to the lady chastened, modest and humble. Moll comes to the conclusion that women should play difficult to access. So playing difficult to access is not a virtue. It is kind of hypocrisy, it is kind of arrogance, it displays vanity, but this was the way that women could be esteemed or could gain esteem for others. Because if women appeared to be too easy to access, then they lost esteem in the eyes of men. On page 63, Moll is looking for a husband with the help of the captain's lady. She has 460 pounds, therefore you may imagine that this lady became very faithful and loyal to Moll. Because of Moll's advice, the captain returned to her, and then she would help her. Moll has 460 pounds, many rich clothes, a gold watch, some jewels, and 30 to 40 to be realized, 30 to 40 pounds to be realized from linen. So you notice how commercial the society was, that Defoe gives a list of valuable goods that Moll possessed, and her total worth could be calculated by looking at the value of all the goods that she had as well as the money that she had. Moll decides the men made no scruple to set themselves out as persons meriting a woman of fortune, when they had really no fortune of their own, as it was but just to deal with them in their own way, and if it was possible, to deceive the deceiver. So Moll has at this point 460 pounds and goods worth maybe another 100 or 200 pounds. That was not too much of money, but it was respectable. However, Moll was by no definition rich at this point, but she found that men always paraded themselves as wealthy and rich and deceived women. So she decided that women should also deceive the deceiver by playing, doubly false. So women should also appear to be rich to deceive the men. The captain's lady puts her up in her own house. So here we will have a very funny situation where both the man and Moll, both of them pretend to be rich, whereas neither of them was rich. The captain's lady puts her up in her own house, calls her cousin, and through her husband spreads the rumor that the widow has a fortune of 1,500 pounds. So 460 pounds and 1,500 pounds, you can see the huge gap. But as the lady spread this rumor that Moll had 1,500 pounds, naturally many men were attracted towards her. Many suitors approached Moll, and Moll says, I picked out my man without much difficulty by the judgment I made of his way of courting me. I had let him run on with his protestations and oaths that he loved me above all the world, that if I would make him happy, that was enough. So the man pretended to value Moll above her property, but actually the man was also eyeing Moll's property because he heard that Moll had 1,500 pounds. That is the man from Virginia. So Moll allows him to make all these false oaths and protestations of love, that if I would make him happy, that was enough, and so on. All which I knew was upon supposition, nay, it was upon a full satisfaction that I was very rich. So the man courted her in this desperate way because he was fully convinced that Moll was very rich, though I never told him a word of it myself. So there lies the cunning. Moll never lied to the man because she never told these things herself, but the captain's lady told these things to the man. The man earns from 3 plantations in Virginia 300 pounds a year, but that may be more if they lived there. So, plantations could be also managed from a distance, and the man was at this point in England. So, if he lived in Virginia, then the earning of the plantations would increase. Moll had 500 pounds, but the man expected her to have 1,500. Moll marries him after a fortnight and gives him in installments 180 pounds, pretending that she gave somebody a loan of 600 pounds and that this little money is the interest earned on that. So Moll never shows her full wealth to the man, but she gives him 180 pounds, not altogether, but in installments, in small amounts, and says that this amount is the interest of the loan that she gave to somebody else, which would further convince the man that Moll was very rich. Pages 71 to 76. Moll goes to Virginia. So this is a big jump. And another thing we notice that Moll married this man, of course, suppressing her previous marriage, because legally she could not marry. So she took a different name and she suppressed her identity, true identity, and therefore she could easily suppress the fact of her previous marriage, and she married this man. Then she decided to go to Virginia, and she took this big decision because she believed that if she lived with the man in Virginia, then the earning of the plantations would increase. And there she meets her mother-in-law, who tells her how she was branded as a thief in England. So her mother-in-law, who will eventually be proved to be her own mother, her mother-in-law, it appears, wanted to chat, as old people often do. They would want to chat and unnecessarily spill the beans. So her mother-in-law chatted with her and showed her her palm where it was branded that she was a thief. So before transporting her to Virginia, the jail authorities branded her hand like those of other convicts. So branding means that that mark will never go for the rest of the life, because branding was done with hot, iron rod or something, hot metal, with which some letter or something was branded on the skin, which got burnt and forever became a mark on the body, which could not be removed. From her conversation, Moll realizes that she was her own mother and her husband was her half-brother. So one would have said that this was a tragic revelation, but we cannot use the word tragic with respect to Moll because this is a novel, it is not a tragedy, and Moll is not a tragic character. She is not from the higher classes at all. On the other hand, on the contrary, she is from the lower classes. And as you know that the characters in comedies are from lower classes. Therefore, Moll Flanders would be like a comic epic in prose. Fielding's famous definition of novel, that it is a comic epic in prose. So when she realized that her husband was her half-brother, because her mother married somebody else in America, in Virginia, and then this man was born. Even then, it was sinful to marry one's half-brother, because after all, he was the son of her own mother. So we see that by this time, Moll had 2 children with this man before he knew it, before she knew it. So we cannot really blame Moll for having this incestuous relationship. So our concern should rather be, how does she behave after this revelation, after she comes to know about this. By this time she had 2 children with this husband, and she was anguished that she lay with him every night. She was anguished, which means that she was not at all happy, and she was desperate to find some other way to remove herself from this sin. I was but too sure of the fact I lived therefore in open, avowed incest and whoredom, and all under the appearance of an honest wife. So this is the part of the incestuous relationship of Moll advertised in the title of the novel. And this part would be very sensational. Somebody living in an incestuous relationship. But as we see that Defoe is quite kind to Moll, and also Defoe presents Moll as conscientious, because after she comes to know that her husband was her half-brother, she stops living with him. So Moll in disgust became estranged with her husband and told him that neither he was her lawful husband nor the children had any lawful status. So Moll, of course, if you read the novel, this is a summary. If you read the novel, Moll for many months, for a very long time, did not reveal to her husband why she was not sleeping with him and why she behaved the way she was behaving with him. So without understanding the reason, her husband was becoming more and more bitter, and the relationship got very embittered, naturally, because her husband was thinking that for no reason Moll was depriving him of sex and companionship. But finally, when he pressed too much, then Moll was forced to tell him. And when he told him, she first told her mother-in-law about this, and her mother-in-law was aghast, was extremely shocked to hear this, but she did not know what to do about it. Then after a long time, she was forced to tell her husband, and when her husband knew about this fact that he married his own half-sister, then he got almost like insane, very angry, very embittered, and the relationship was completely ruined. Moll tells her mother the discovery of incest. Her mother thought that the whole thing should be suppressed. Finally, Moll tells her husband about the incest. That is on page 83. He made 2 attempts at suicide and became a little off in his head. After staying for 8 years in Virginia, Moll returns to England in a despicable situation. So Moll had no other way but to leave America altogether, and she wanted to come back to England, and she came back. But now her position was very insecure. She had no more than 200 to 300 pounds. To look at her cargo of goods, she goes to Bristol and then comes to Bath. So Moll had dispatched her goods by ship, and naturally the passenger ship would come much earlier. The cargo ship moved slowly and would come much later. And Moll was following the route of the cargo ship because it will not come to London. So she went to Bristol and then to Bath. Now begins the Bath episode. So here Moll has another adventure, as we will see. The Bath is a place of gallantry enough. You know, Bath is a town in England, spa town. It was a Roman spa. So today it is mostly a tourist place, and the spa is still there, and it was very popular in the Victorian period. It is a place of gallantry enough, expensive and full of snares. With the help of a woman, Moll gets introduced to a gentleman in Bath. The man was married, but his wife was distempered in the head. So obviously, Moll is once again hunting for men, because in that society, no woman could live alone respectfully. So every woman must have some husband or some other man taking care of her. So he was introduced to a gentleman. The man was married, but his wife was distempered in the head. So the gentleman from Bath, who had an unhappy marriage, his wife was schizophrenic. The other woman makes the gentleman understand that Moll was in indigent circumstances, and he begins to give Moll money. Indigent means that she was poor. So Moll's friend told this gentleman that Moll was poor. The gentleman was attracted towards Moll and began to give her money. The man goes to a place called Shepton, where he falls very ill, and he sends a coach to bring Moll. Moll nurses him, and an intimacy develops between them. They live together in Bath, exercising restraint for about 2 years. So this is a remarkable episode, and whether realistic or not, Defoe shows the effect of middle class values or middle class virtues. Since the gentleman could not depend upon his wife, he more and more depended upon Moll. And when he fell ill in a small town called Shepton, there was nobody to help him. Then he asked Moll to come and help him. Moll came and nursed him through his sickness, and then they began to live in Bath together. And for 2 years, according to the author, they had a platonic relationship. They lived together, even lay in the same bed, but without any sexual relationship. But this, of course, could not go on forever. They lived together in Bath, exercising restraint for about 2 years. One night, both of them were drunk and the restraint was breached. Thus the government of our virtue was broken, and I exchanged the place of friend for that unmusical, harsh-sounding title of hope. So long Moll was the man's friend, but friendship between a man and a woman is very fragile because there is always this sexual attraction. This friendship was broken, and then Moll regrets kind of that from a friend she now becomes a whore because her status was that of a concubine, and also lower than that because she was married to another man, and here she is having sexual relationship with other men. So she has sexual relationship with diverse men already in her life. Therefore, it is a kind of status of a whore or prostitute. She is also accepting money from the man. So her status was not at all virtuous. Moll gets pregnant. So here we have to note that that Defoe repeatedly raises the idea of virtue and vice insofar as sexual relationships are concerned. The middle class attitude towards virtue with regard to sexuality, or the idea of chastity, and the sharp distinction between chastity and profligacy, the chaste woman and the prostitute. Defoe exposes the hypocrisy of Defoe exposes the hypocrisy of the middle class idea of chastity because in a society where women have no recourse, no access to maintenance, to welfare, one cannot impose this idea of chastity upon them. So only rich women who have sufficient money and wealth, for them perhaps this idea of virtue in matters of sexuality may be imposed or may be important. For women, for lower classes or marginalized women, poor women, the attempt to impose this idea of chastity is very unjustified, and as we can see in Moll's career, that she had to struggle a lot throughout her life, and she judges herself that she falls from the idea of a chaste woman, that she becomes a whore, that she becomes a prostitute. So the judgment of society here is self-imposed, because Moll was brought up according to the norms of a middle class family. So she has the values of a middle class, not of a working class, and she can judge her conduct as that of a fallen woman. Moll gets pregnant, and the man gives her sufficient money for her lying in, that is for her pregnancy, during her pregnancy and her childbirth, that period is called lying-in. So where she must take the help of some nurse. The man gives her money for that. She saves from this amount and is left with 200 guineas. She gives birth to a boy, and the man hires an apartment for her in Hammersmith, from where she goes to London. So the man made all arrangements for Moll's pregnancy and childbirth, and the boy is born, and the man also pays for the maintenance of Moll and the boy. So here Moll is in the position of a concubine of the gentleman from Bath, but to her own conscience, to her own judgment, she is not just a concubine, but she is a whore or prostitute. Now, of course, the gentleman does not know that. The gentleman of Bath does not know about the previous marriages or the previous sexual relations. I lived 6 years, so Moll was prosperous, but she was not a wife. So we have seen earlier that Moll wanted to marry, wanted to have the status of a wife. But apart from the stay in Virginia, this status constantly eluded her. I lived 6 years in this happy but unhappy condition, in which time I brought him 3 children, but only the first of them lived. So the great number of children that Moll gives birth to in her whole career is also an interesting figure, and the novelist does not care about keeping track of all the children. Only one or two, the reader is told about one or two of the children, and with only one child, that is the son from the man from Virginia, Moll is reunited. She is not reunited with any other children of her own. Some of her children die and so on. So later I will show, after the discussion of the novel, I will show you a chart about all her sexual partnerships or marriage partnerships and all the children and how much we know about them. So this period with the gentleman of Bath, Moll calls it happy but unhappy. Happy because she was taken care of, she was looked after, her child was looked after by the gentleman, so the gentleman was almost like her husband. And of course the gentleman may be accused of adulterous relationship, because we remember that the gentleman had a wife who was mad, insane. So later this man comes to regret of this adulterous relationship. The gentleman falls sick again and sends her a letter. He was living with his in-laws in Bloomsbury in London. The gentleman had a religious conversion after this illness. He hated this life of adultery and criminal correspondence with Moll. So after his illness, when he recovers, he has a religious conversion. That is, as a Christian, he begins to repent of having an adulterous relationship with Moll. So even though Moll provided him with mental support and support in many other ways, she nursed him when he was sick, she gave birth to his child. So in many ways the gentleman was indebted to Moll, but this relationship was not sanctioned by religion. It was an adulterous relationship, and therefore he had a conversion, change of mind, and he did not want to have this relationship which he considered criminal relationship, because adultery is a crime in the eye of law. He did not want to continue with this relationship, and he wrote Moll a letter. He writes a final letter severing all relations with Moll, but promising to take care of the 5-year-old boy. Then quotation, "But I never once reflected that I was all this while a married woman, a wife to Mr. the linen draper, who, though he had left me by the necessity of his circumstances, had no power to discharge me from the marriage contract which was between us, or to give me a legal liberty to marry again, so that I had been no less than a whore and an adulteress all this while. So Moll says that all this time when I was living with this man, the gentleman from Bath, I never reflected that I was another man's wife, and that man was never in a position to give me liberty to marry again, that is, to give me a legal divorce. So once Moll gets this letter from the gentleman of Bath, then she reflects on her own career, and she finds it to be adulterous and criminal. So she is her own judge, and she judges herself, severely. Then we hear about what happened to her cargo. From the cargo of goods sent by her half-brother husband and her savings, Moll had 450 pounds. A goldsmith who she trusted with her money lost 70 pounds. So she gave some money to a goldsmith, and the goldsmith lost that money. So he did not repay Moll. Moll got only 450 pounds from her goods. She had a plate and clothes and linen. So we always see in Defoe, in this novel, this enumeration of the commodities, the properties that Moll possessed at any one point of time. And not just the cash, but linen, gold watch, different commodities, all valuables, to assess her total worth at any point of time. And one may make a map, a chart of how much Moll was worth at different points of time, because Defoe makes it so clear. The data is available in the novel. With this talk, I had to contend the world again, because the gentleman of Bath, he severed all relationships with Moll. So Moll again faced the world alone and with this much of property. But Moll was not young anymore. In the next place, when a woman is thus left desolate and void of counsel, she is just like a bag of money or a jewel dropped on the highway, which is a prey to the next comer. So that is from Defoe. So a woman all alone in this world, whatever she is worth, she is like bag of money dropped on the road, and anybody can pick it up. And most likely greedy men or men who have little moral qualms would pick up. So Moll was at the mercy of the world. Moll meets a North Country woman, North Country, north of England. She and everyone else believed that Moll was worth 3,000–4,000 pounds, and that she had the whole money with her. So this was a highly exaggerated assumption. So Moll had very little money, as Defoe made it clear, 460 pounds and a gold plate and some linen and so on. But somehow she managed to create this impression to the woman from the North Country and everybody else that she had 3,000–4,000 pounds. The North Country woman told her that she has a sister in Liverpool and a gentleman brother who has an estate in Ireland. So here begins this very interesting and funny situation. More than the man from Virginia, the man from Lancashire, he competes with Moll in trying to prove that he was wealthy. So as Moll appears to be very wealthy, worth 3,000–4,000 pounds, the man, Lancashire man, also pretends that he has an estate in Ireland. So having an estate means one who is from an aristocratic family, a noble family, would only have landed estate. Moll meets a banker to get help with managing her money. And this banker in London, another gentleman who helps Moll with money management. But as we will see that this banker also wants to marry Moll, but Moll keeps him in reserve and goes to the North Country. She decides to first try out her luck in the North Country. If she is fortunate, she will get some wealthy husband there. Otherwise, the banker is kept in reserve. She can always come back and have the banker there if she fails to find a husband in the North. The banker suggests that she should get somebody to take care of her as well as her money. He discloses to her that his wife is a whore and he is a cuckold. So that is another unfortunate disclosure. The banker's wife is a prostitute or a woman of very slack morality. So we see that, the banker of course belongs to the middle class. But among middle class women, there was no lack of women of little virtue. So middle class women could also become prostitutes. In the case of the gentleman from Bath, his wife was schizophrenic. In the case of the banker, his wife was a prostitute. So gentlemen from middle class were also not safe where marriage is concerned, because it is not advertised in one's face whether one is virtuous or not, nor is it advertised in one's face whether one is wealthy or one is poor. So Defoe exposes the society where people appear to be very hypocritical, all the time trying to deceive others, often succeeding in deceiving others and so on, and people are in desperate situations. Well, I have talked for a long time. If you have any questions, you can. Yes.
So we find in this novel the importance of marriage.
Yes.
Sir, do you explain it?
Well, marriage is a social institution, much acclaimed by the middle class, particularly as a very important institution. It gives sanction to sexual relationship because both religion as well as middle class ethics speaks against sexual relationship outside marriage, at least in the traditional way of life. Today, of course, sexual relationship outside marriage or before marriage, premarital sex, these are not very important issues at all in society. In Western society, it is not an issue. In Indian society, which is still very conservative, it is an issue, but the hold of tradition is gradually weakening. And why is it weakening? Because sexuality is something private, and according to bourgeois values, nobody should have any say in anybody's private matters. So when even in our law, if two adults are agreeable to having a sexual relationship, it is permissible even outside marriage. However, they must be unmarried people. If a married person has a sexual relationship with another person, that is adultery and that is a crime universally accepted. So marriage as a social institution, particularly in the middle class, as we see, Defoe represents the middle class in England. It was considered a very important institution, but In this institution of marriage, usually in romantic literature we see that any relationship between man and woman is looked upon as a romantic relationship where love is the predominant virtue. But Defoe is writing before Romanticism, and he is depicting a society where marriage is looked upon from a practical point of view. The English society was mostly controlled by bourgeois values, by middle class values, because the aristocracy had already lost its power, the feudal aristocracy, and the working class people did not have any power. So it is the bourgeois people who ruled the society, and their middle class values were held in esteem. And according to middle class values, first there was the question of chastity. Any sexual relationship outside marriage would be considered as unacceptable, and Defoe exposes the hypocrisy of this value being universally imposed upon all classes of women particularly. And secondly, Defoe exposes how marriage was a means of upgrading one's status. So for English people, marriage was mostly a consideration of money. So before any marriage, one would look at how much the groom or the bride is worth. So whether by marrying that particular person, the other person will be able to upgrade his financial status or not. Even in Jane Austen's novel, we still see the same, prioritization of money and wealth in marriage. Okay, so that is why marriage is an important issue in this novel, because in depicting a society, marriage is significant insofar as it has anything to say on sexual relations.
So in the novel, Maule's character is loaded with libellousness and licentiousness. Doesn't her espousal of debauchery and sexual treasons fall as subversive, quite subversive, and ahead of its time in Defoe's period?
Yes.
What authorial motivations could have the author had, especially if we consider his position as a male author?
Yes, very good question. Of course, Defoe tantalizingly presents Maule as the heroine of his novel, who is an unchaste and licentious person. So the question arises, does the author support the licentious character of his heroine? And the author is a male author all the same. As it is a picaresque novel, the Picaro is a rogue character. So according to the genre of the novel, Maule is appropriate as a rogue character. The only difference being that she is a woman. So when we begin to accept women as also, being capable of being villains, then that is ironically, a step towards the emancipation of women. So, the idea that women cannot be bad or women must always be virtuous, this middle class idea is questioned by Defoe's novel. Why this idea of chastity is imposed upon women only? Because this is not imposed upon men. Men could always have multiple sexual affairs, and at the same time could have wives at home. They could have concubines and so on. And the law of adultery was hardly used against men, because to use it against men, first of all, women must have access to the courts, and if their wives complain to the court against the debauchery of their husbands, only then that would happen. But the wives never complained, mainly because it was a patriarchal society, And this attitude that men can do anything, that was deeply entrenched in the psyche of everybody, including the women. So men could, go away being unchaste, not being virtuous, and so on. But nobody would consider them, bad for that. So by exposing this hypocrisy, first of all, Defoe makes the protagonist of his novel a woman. Secondly, the woman herself judges her character and finds much of her licentiousness despicable. So Defoe wants to show that just because somebody is forced to live an unchaste life or slack life of loose morality, or having different sexual relationships, unauthorized relationships, does not mean that that person is essentially evil. Okay, well, I can discuss this in greater detail later, but now I have another class. So I do not know whether you are satisfied.
So I did have another question,
Yes.
but
Okay, go ahead quickly.
oh, okay, sir. This is a picaresque novel with a rogue woman protagonist. I mean, Moll is portrayed as unchaste, but at the same time, her character remains imbued with the same vitality and the same vigor of the rogue hero, of the typical rogue hero of a picaresque novel. Doesn't this portrayal radically attempt to dismantle the polarized sexist lens with which women were viewed through in Defoe's times?
Yes, of course. That is what I said, that the fact that Defoe chose a woman to be the protagonist and to be a picaresque heroine of his novel, by doing that he challenges the conventional idea that women cannot be villains or women cannot be rogues, and ironically, in some way, it is an emancipation of women because whether you do something good or do something evil, when you take up your life in your own hands and you feel responsible for whatever you do, and you do not always become, the ward of your husband or your father or somebody else, then you become to some extent free. So Defoe's point here is to emphasize the the need for women to be free, for women to be enterprising, for women to take up their own lives in their own hands and so on. So even though Moll makes many mistakes, or she is forced to have an unethical conduct in many matters, she is also a thief and so on and so forth. But even then, she is an independent woman. Whatever career, even the career of a thief, she has a career of her own. She controls her own life, and she deals with the men in her life in a very judicious way. And she also sees through the immoral or unjust behavior of men or the vanity of men. And there are many comments of what women need to do in order to free themselves of the patriarchal impositions.